You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look now and take some time for hemp. Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Oh, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking time for hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leitch. On the big broadcast today, I'm going to be joined by my two joint hosts, Al Byrne and Al Graham. They have been busy this week doing lots of research on the wonderful plant known as cannabis hemp. And Al Byrne has been working on it towards the medical aspect of it. And Al Graham has been working on it towards the industrial hemp of it, which means that we have come together under one umbrella to let you know how important it is to take time for hemp. Please hit the like and share button for us if you don't mind. That's how we get found. It helps with the algorithms, and it also lets people know that this is content that is of value. On the program today, my joint host, Al Byrne. Say hi, Al.
Hi, guys. Thank you, Casper. You want me to keep going? I'll keep going.
Yeah. And for a minute there, it looked like a Chinese movie where your lips were moving, but there was no sound.
Very possible. Well, I've been known to do that trick. But anyway, as far as we hope to bring you education, in a couple of different ways. Today's interview is going to be live. And we also have a more enormous archive of previous interviews on all kinds of subjects with all kinds of smart people. And it's all available to you at Time for Hemp. And it's actually free. If you're interested in this subject, and you wouldn't be here probably if you had not some kind of interest, look at our archive when you got nothing to do. And like Casper says, let other people know what's going on. These are interesting people. They're current that we're doing, like the fellow today. And we want other people to know. That's the whole point of this whole thing. So I'm Al Byrne. I'm glad to be here. I'm one of the joint hosts. And the other guy that's a joint host is, it's a very international show today. Our guest is in Mexico, and my co-host here is up in Canada. Al Graham. You all do? Yeah, there he is.
There I am. Yeah,
I'm up here with a hat.
I'm up here in good old Canada.
Well, wait a minute. I want the audience to understand something. Hat, no hat.
I got a little more hair than Casper.
I'm sorry. This is my moment. Yeah, I know. That's what I was pointing out there, Casper.
Yeah.
And I do want to remind the audience that anytime you hear the word joint on the big broadcast, you hit your pipe, your vaporizer, your bongs, or your joint and take a time for hemp. And Al Graham, I understand that Canada might become America's next state. Is that true? Our 51st state?
Hey, no politics. No politics.
We're starting off this one funny.
I'll let you bring on our guest today, Al Graham, and you can introduce the whole world to our wonderful guest and tell everybody about what he's been up to. I will say this, if you say Mr. Hemp, you get a clue as to who he is.
Yes, Jason, our guest. I'm going to call him the guy who got everything going. Always takes a patient that really breaks open the door on a lot of stuff, whether it's medicinal, which can eventually help with the recreational end of things. And that's something that Jason did when it comes to Colorado. And I know I'm going to mess up his last name, so I'm just going to call him Jason. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen. It's Jason Lauve. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for welcoming me on the show.
You're welcome.
Appreciate y'all. Al and Casper, thank you.
Well, before you jump off into anything, do you have the Mr. Hemp copywritten trademark? I mean, I see a little symbol alongside it.
Yeah, I mean, I put a little TM on there years ago when I started using it. Originally, that name was given to me by some of the politicians in Colorado when I was working on the first legislation for hemp in 2011 with Representative Wes McKinley and Senator Schwartz and a handful of others. And so they kind of passed that on to me, and it stuck. But I didn't really go through the paperwork. It wasn't something at the time that was very important to me. It's there though. It sticks. And down here in Mexico, people call me Don Cáñamo, Senor Cáñamo, essentially.
I'll just call you Jason. That's too hard for me to go for.
I appreciate that. That's okay. I prefer Jason. Thanks, Casper.
Well, Jason, we know you're in Mexico. And I'd like you to explain it at your leisure, but you were a patient. Cannabis helped you to become a much better health patient. And then you were so good. I like to tell a quick story about one of the federal patients in the United States, a lady named Barbara Douglas. She lived in Iowa on the lake. And she just got on the cannabis program. She had MS. I visited her at her home. She could barely walk a couple of steps. It was miserable. She got on the medical cannabis. I went back to her home, visited her pretty much a year later. And I'll shorten it up. I was all the weekend. And when I left, she was on a jet ski on the lake.
Wow.
Jason did something almost like that, and I want him to tell that story. Jason, welcome. It's your show. Let's go.
Thank you. Thanks, Al. I appreciate you sharing that story with Barbara. I met her many, many years ago before I even broke my back. I think it was in Boulder, if I remember right, in Colorado. So the story is long. There's lots of details, but they all fit together quite nicely. My background is not in hemp or cannabis. I actually come from a different world, if you will. So I worked on the insurance litigation for World Trade Center. I've worked on a lot of, I'll call them investigations. I used to build assets in the computer, so I have a very strong computing background. And in terms of studying or my educational background, studied architecture, urban planning, environmental design, and a couple things in between. And the computer was a tool that I used the whole way through, even today. And so I'm originally from New York, grew up in New York City, spent a lot of time on a farm in upstate New York, probably about 9 years up there. And well-traveled, many places around the world, but ended up finding my way to Colorado when I was about 23 and lived in Boulder for quite a while and some other areas around there. Denver and so on. And I was involved in the computer world. And so I had a very, I'll call it a computer lab in Boulder. And I first was doing architecture work, and then that sort of evolved into working with one of the Imagineers from Disney. And I didn't know this back then, but eventually figured out that the lab was really filled with very talented people that worked on mobile phone technologies, interactive television. They did work for law enforcement. They kind of had their hands a little bit here and there. And the mentor that I was guided by, if you will, invited me into the lab to learn some software at the time, which really nobody had understood. And so I sat in the computer for about a year and a half and learned this 3D software. Nowadays they call it Maya. And so all of that led me down this pathway. And I was a big skier. I was a big outdoor person. I used to volunteer for the disabled ski program in Colorado and teach people with mental and physical disabilities how to ski. In my 11th year, I got hit by somebody behind me. Took me out. It doesn't matter if it's a snowboarder or a skier, but he broke my back and fractured 3 vertebrae, 2 ribs. I've got a tear in my spinal cord. And so that's the beginning of all this.
Wow.
Oh.
Yeah, so it got pretty heavy. So I'll gotta just go in. If you guys have any questions, please just jump in at any time.
We will jump in.
No, so what
Yeah.
happened
All right.
then? That's my question. What happened next?
So yeah, that was 2004 when I got hit, and I ended up in the hospital. Obviously, the first hospital that I was brought into, and this really started to expose to me, part of our health system, and they, in my view, intentionally blurred the x-rays and sent me on my way, sent me back home on Dilaudid and all sorts of opiates. And so for the next 2 weeks, I was just writhing in pain, and finally found myself in another hospital. They did an MRI and found that I had a tear in my spinal cord between L4, L5 in my vertebrae, between the vertebrae. And so that took me down this pathway of being introduced, if you will, to the medical world and how they treat us. I was told that I wouldn't walk again. I was put on tramadol and oxycodone and gabapentin and all these other medications that I ended up taking for about 11 years. And we know how detrimental these things can be. Early on in that process, I was introduced to cannabis in a medicinal way. I mean, I smoked here and there before I broke my back, but nowhere near what I had experienced after I was brought under the learning curve, if you will, originally from Dr. Robert Melamede, who lived in Colorado Springs.
Mm-hmm.
And that opened the door to many of you guys along the way. And when I say you guys, I'll just say the whole cannabis community that's still holding together by a thread, but I think we're holding together. And that really it brought me down this pathway that exposed me to things that I really had passions with. So not just healing for myself, but architecture, machinery, formulation, a lot of traveling, and so on and so forth. And so Dr. Bob started to coach me in taking about 1 gram or 2 of the FECO oil, full extract cannabis oil. Some people call it RSO, Rick Simpson oil. And I would float in my hot tub. I had a big hot tub, probably had enough room for about 20 people in there. And I would just float in there after taking it. Yeah, it was a pool with bubbles in the hot water, but it was I wish I could laugh at it back then. But I was really just trying to take care of the pain levels and the spasms and all the side effects from the medication, as we all know. I don't have to go down that list.
No.
And little by little, I started to notice improvements with the spasticity, improvements with controlling my pain. Now, mind you, I was still on the opiates for many, many years in this process, but cannabis, I think, really started to give me the foundation of what I needed to move forward. And so we'll kind of address this as the endocannabinoid system. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Did you find that with once you started consuming the cannabis, that your opiate consumption, did it just naturally come down?
So that took a little bit of time, but yes. And I think a lot of it in the beginning was I didn't really understand that the medical system was not here to support me. It was really here to feed me what they wanted. Nowadays, I'll call it sort of a money system, keep us as a client. And my doctor, my physician at the time, it was kind of like going to McDonald's, getting supersized every time I went there. And so we'd up my dose constantly every time I go back for the 11 years. And now we know, of course, about the Sackler family and how that whole side of it was also manipulated.
Yeah.
And from that, I also learned through Dr. Gabor Mate's work what addiction really was or is, in my view. It's not necessarily the substance, but it's something that it's a trauma that we've been through in the past that leads us to a crutch, if you will. And so it could be food, it could be medications, it could be consumption, buying CDs, you know, and not listening to them.
Dr. Gabor
But
talks about that.
Yeah, he's from Canada.
Yeah.
And so his book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, was what really opened that door to me. And I started to also use cannabis in different ways. And this was at the guidance of people like Dr. Meshulam or Abrams. So I can go down that list. Many, many people that are around us were so generous in sharing their information that it really enabled me to make my choices about what I needed versus relying on information and not knowing much about, you know, what I was doing. And being, you know, someone who loves education, I just kept learning.
Well, I understand now what it was that caused you to find medical cannabis. But while you're busy healing and taking medicines and trying to deal with the side effects and run to and from your doctor's appointments and put up with all the aspirations of moving back into the world with your real life, what on earth caused you to complicate your path even more by becoming a pro-medical marijuana activist? Oh, medical cannabis activist. Dare I say marijuana with this group of people?
You stand corrected, Casper.
So,
Casper, you actually bring up some important things.
Well, because
we're going to go there. Me and you are going to go there, Jason.
But because you're becoming public and you're going to appointments now to do public speaking and to talk to people, and you're also putting your freedom out there. So I thought I'd ask.
Yes, that's a great question, and it's something that these days it's a passion. It's something that really has become a very pivotal part of my life because now I see that people can look at me and see that I'm walking, for example, and they ask questions as to how, and they want to know how. So I see it as cannabis, sativa L, hemp, marijuana, ganja, all those words that we use, to me is one plant. And this is really because the science side of me sees the botanical references and the scientific references. The legal definitions, I think, are misleading. And so, as I mentioned, I did a lot of computer work. And so one of the jobs I was on at the time, I was working on the insurance litigation for World Trade Center. And I started noticing some things in there that were disturbing to me. Not just the videos I saw, but the information. And so in 2007, I became a whistleblower. I sent over 200 pages of documents to Dr. Stephen Jones at Brigham Young University, and he published them online. Now, about a year later, I get raided by law enforcement. What triggered that, I'm not exactly sure. I do know that they spoke to some of my neighbors. I did learn in the court case that they had been surveilling me and watching me for about 3 months before the trial, or before the trial. Before I got arrested and raided. And that really changed my life in many ways. One, because at the time I was a professor in University in Denver and was teaching computer sciences. Basically, what I was trained in building assets for some of these research projects, and there's a list of them. And so when I was charged, I mean, in my heart, I knew I didn't do anything wrong. I knew this plant was helping me medicinally. I knew that the pharmaceutical drugs were harming me, but that my family and a lot of people around me were really believers of the Western medicine world and encouraging me to continue to take the prescriptions. And that was difficult because I had to make that choice of, do I use cannabis and do what's right for me, or do I continue on that pathway of what those around me believe? And And I don't think I would be here today if I stayed on that pathway. And so I was originally facing probably I think it was close to 8 years in prison. The law enforcement found a kilo or 2 pounds, 2 ounces of cannabis in my house, along with 36 plants. And 14 months later, I ended up in the trial. I decided to ignore the plea bargains they offered me, and I went to trial. And this is in Boulder at the time. This is before legalization, of course, or so-called legalization. Yeah, so that's a great article, actually. That's from Spain. That's from a company in Spain that published that. And that's a picture of me after I won my trial, after 4 days of testimony and witnesses and so on and so forth. Even my neurologist came and testified for me. And so I'm sitting there with my box of cannabis that they returned to me. They didn't return everything, but at least they returned that. And that was
surprised when I read that. I was surprised that they had the box there for you to take home. Like it
I was
as if
too.
You had to go through a process and fill out paperwork, so on and so forth. It just looks as if they just gave it to you.
Yeah, I would have thought the cops would have smoked it by then.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Al, because there was a quarter ounce that I usually had I put out in the morning that was high quality, and that one went missing. All the low quality stuff that they found in my freezer was there. But so there are some inside stories about that. Yeah, I mean, I got some winks during the trial from some of the undercover detectives. There was a lot of nuances. I could probably talk, for hours just about the trial itself. But so that picture was just outside in front of the courthouse in Boulder. And after that, we went to my house and had a little celebration. The photo that you shared is with Rob Corey, who was one of the attorneys that helped me out with this project, or my prosecution. My brother's in there, and a bunch of other people that some people would recognize that are still active in the cannabis hemp activism.
There was a group photo there, correct? Right there. Okay.
Yeah, that one. Yep. And some other patients. I think it's my brother with his hand up in the air. And so that led into many things. The next day, I got an email from the university that I was teaching at telling me I was fired. And that's a whole other story, another battle, if you will. You would think that they would honor that I actually won something and could be useful in the university to help educate people about what cannabis really is. Oddly enough, about a year later, they offered my job back. I refused. But so I started publishing Cannabis Health News magazine. I started doing podcasts. I had wonderful guests on my show. Actually, a lot of who Casper has had on the show, you guys have had on this show, are also the same people that I interviewed back then. And I learned a lot. I really was doing this kind of by this, sort of from the seat of my pants. And I learned a lot. I was connected with a lot of really amazing people. And so that led into other things. I ended up writing and co-authoring the first hemp legislation in Colorado in 2011, 2012, and then also the next year in 2013. And that whole thing was a whole other amazing story, a great experience. And that whole legislation passed unanimously in every House, Senate, floor, committee hearing. And so it wasn't stigmatized like we thought it was at the time.
So you basically you challenged the existing law in Colorado as a patient for your right to access and use medicinal cannabis, just like we had a fellow here by the name of Terry Parker who challenged and fought the laws and won the right to access to medicinal cannabis. And because you win the right to medicinal cannabis, that sort of helps to leads towards the recreational end as well.
Yeah, for me, it was more the medical side or medicinal side, excuse me. And then that led into a lot of the industrial uses. And so textiles, fuel, and the list goes on from there. And that's what really got me interested. And I knew about this stuff. I had a copy of The Emperor Wears No Clothes from Jack Herer. And I had already had that bookmarked and tagged and written in and all this stuff from the 90s. And in the 90s, back, I didn't mention this, but I had started a political action committee called the, oh gosh, I can't remember what we called it. But this was when Loretta Nall was doing the, oh gosh, you guys might remember Loretta. I can't remember the Colorado Marijuana Party, I think it was, the United States Marijuana Party. And then I kind of let that go, and Wayward Bill picked it up. And so that was sort of a little precursor. But so it got me fascinated into these potentials. And I was actually camped out on the lawn of the Denver Capitol, participating in the beginning of Occupy Wall Street. Although I wasn't really involved in that. I was more interested in just learning about all these really amazing people that were around me protesting their own specific thing. And Representative Wes McKinley came out and pitched his cowboy teepee next to my tent one evening, and we talked hemp all night. Next morning I wake up, he's gone. And about 2 weeks later, he calls me up and says, "Hey, Jason, come into my office." I had no idea why. I was like, oh, cool. I get to roll into the Capitol and talk to a politician. And so I get there and I roll into the office. I'm still in the wheelchair at the time. And he says, "Okay, we're going to write a hemp bill today." And in about 40 minutes, we had basically the first draft of the hemp legislation that then passed in 2012.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that was a big one.
That's pretty fucking cool. Wow. It
was very, very cool. And that down this huge pathway. And for me, I see things very differently. I think we all do, but I see things really differently in life. I don't let things intimidate me. I tend to jump full force into whatever I do. Sometimes I make mistakes and I learn from them, but sometimes things take off. And the traction that we got behind us that first year of legislation was absolutely amazing. On the negative side, or on the weird side, I'll say, is that a lot of people started coming out of the woodwork and coming from big industries. And I was naive back then. I didn't know who was who. I didn't know that, sitting with the family of DuPont, for example, was not the right thing to do, even though I smoked a joint with them. I would do federal presentations for various sectors of the government, agriculture, and so on and so forth. I was invited all over the country to other countries to talk about the law side in regards to my experience, the mechanical or chemical or chemistry side of things, as well as the activism side of things and the medicinal side of things. And all of these things were really dear to my heart. And it felt like every time I went forward in my life, cannabis kept calling me back and say, "Hey, this is where you're supposed to be. Follow this path." And it allowed me to use the skills that I had learned over the years. And so I'm now, after all these years, I'm now down here in Mexico. I've been back and forth down into this area, down near Guatemala, for about 7 years. And I've networked into basically the same kind of crowd, the politicians, the business people, the growers, the communities. And it's been amazing. And there's been a lot of stuff that's happened in between. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that, I encountered a lot of these people coming from pharmaceutical, from petroleum, from industries that didn't want us doing what we were doing. And I think because, everyone around me, you guys, Barbara, Irv, the research scientists out there, the doctors out there, the people who run businesses like Barbara from EnviroTextiles, I started to really see a different pathway and start to understand that because of the way I see things and because of how I went about things with winning my court case or with the legislation, I still feel that my view is not quite understood, but it works. And I can address some of those things specifically regarding like definitions that we have today in the 2018 Farm Bill.
One
But
now that you're living
but
down in
yeah, so that's the quick.
Mexico, aren't you concerned about the cartels? I know that
It's a
they
great
moved to
question,
America,
Casper.
so maybe you don't have to, because maybe they've all moved to America by now. They're living in New York, but
Well, if so, they're going to get deported anyway.
You've
no,
got
I mean,
that's one of the big issues I actually learned about. Yeah. So the United States
and
is actually filled with cartel control in all the states.
because I can
I still
certainly
have
tell you
friends. Fortunate.
here in America, they just put you in jail. In Mexico, they kill you.
Yeah. Well, they'll
Jason,
torture you first.
while we're speaking Mexico, for my own edification, I think I know, but I don't want to say so. But certainly the audience, what are the cannabis laws for a citizen right now in Mexico?
So it's quite an interesting story. But being in Mexico, I learned, and this is again, I researched this, but I basically found that if I applied to the health department here for permission to use cannabis for health uses, they would deny me. And so I went through that process, got the paper, the denial, and went to the Supreme Court demanding that my human rights be recognized. And so this is another big thing that we really should be talking about in the United States is human rights, not so much as civil rights. And so the Supreme Court honored that request, essentially, or my demand. We don't ask permission, we make statements of demand in this case. And I have a document that basically says that I can carry as much as I want, grow as much as I want, use as much as I want, basically do anything I want except for commercial use. That's another sort of separate pathway. And so currently, because of what's happening in the United States, and this is stuff I've been trying to talk about with many people, Mexico has been hugely affected by what's been happening with the border issues and many things. And so right now in Chiapas, in this area, there's actually a special police force that's been going around shutting down the cannabis stores and clamping down. I think it's to simplify who they're going after. They don't want to accidentally net the wrong people. So they're really just kind of simplifying things by shutting things down, I think temporarily, and then get rid of the crime, and then we'll see where it goes in the next couple of years. With some of the local politicians and things like this to move forward, I haven't seen any bad things in terms of they want to clamp down on this completely in the whole country. I think it's just kind of what's happening now. Yeah, so right now the average person can have 5 grams on them, no problem. And again, these laws aren't really completed. They're still working towards the regulatory system.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, in my mind, what I see and what I'm not supportive of is they're following the United States. And that I'm not happy with, because I don't think that what we're doing in the United States is working either. I didn't think it was going to work from the very beginning. And that's pretty much what I've been trying to point at for all these years, is that in my belief, the pharmaceutical companies specifically, including other industries, but specifically pharma, has gained control over the pathway that we're on. And you can see this in regards to like isolates, right? So to me, isolates are a pharmaceutical model. The regulatory system is a pharmaceutical model. The definition of cannabis hemp is a pharmaceutical model. And we know that cannabis is food. We know cannabis is nutrition. We know it's medicinal plant. And you can see around me, I have a garden over here where I have a lot of medicinal plants, and I've been learning from the traditional Mayan medicinal community over the last 6-7 years. And what I've learned from them, as well as other belief systems, same in the United States with herbology and the Native Americans up there, is these plants, as you guys know, these plants are here for our benefit. Mm-hmm. And so I don't believe we should have to go through a Western medicine model to gain access to this plant. I think it's something that, just like with echinacea or chamomile or any of the other plants we have access to, it should be up to us individually.
Now,
and we should have proper education.
Like some people call it a herb, some people call it a vegetable.
Right. It's exactly.
Well, we don't allow people from growing vegetables.
On that subject, right. Al, 2014, so this is 11 years ago, the American Herbal Association actually passed a resolution and said cannabis is an herb. Not only that, that same organization the next year produced a monologue on the uses of the plant. In other words, is this thing any good or not? And they produced the second largest monologue in the history of the organization, second only to garlic. So it's an herb. That's been decided by people that know those things. We all understand it's a plant. This gets to Al every show, but I'm going to say it over and over again. It's a plant. It's not a drug. And as soon as you get your senator and your representative in Mexico, in Canada, and the United States to understand it's a plant, we might be getting somewhere. On definitions, Jason, I just want to tell you a history story. Back in the day,
Please.
There was a big organization of people that were looking to legalize some drug. For me, it was cannabis, of course, and the medical and all that stuff. But it was 100 organizations. It was a funded group by a rich guy, and it was very well done. It was very smart. Boy, I learned a lot from all these guys. Took me, all these guys, I just said, I learned a lot from them. They were very smart. They were very courteous. Took me 3 years to convince them when they were speaking publicly or to me about the plant, it would be called cannabis. It took 3 years for the experts to get it. I go through the same routine for one of, I'm a veteran. Casper's a veteran. We're big on veterans. We're big on veterans being able to use cannabis, especially for any of their injuries, whatever they may be, physical or emotional, they should have access. That's another program. We'll get to it. But I use the same thing to just emphasize. I want you to go to your definitions, but we hear about veterans, other people, of course, lots of other people with different kinds of trauma have post-traumatic stress disorder. Disorder is a bad word there. In medical terms, you can be born with a disorder. Well, post-traumatic stress is, you're not born with that. It's after traumatic stress. I mean, hey, so if you're really going to write this or talk about this, I'd like to recommend you just say PTS, post-traumatic stress. That's what it is. Yeah. If you have to call it something else, I think S would be good, PTSS, and that would mean syndrome. Either one would be correct. Disorder is incorrect. But, Jason, you got a thing going with these definitions. What is it? What's your beef?
Well, so there's a lot of angles that kind of came together in all of this. And I'll just kind of start with what I see in Mexico, for example, because I hear in the US, a lot of people are saying, oh, don't use the word marijuana. It's racist, all these kinds of things. Now, down here, it's common. And what's interesting is I came across a 1846 copy of the Mexicana Pharmacopoeia, the Mexican Pharmacopoeia. And it states, and I have it actually right here in front of me, that cannabis indica and cannabis sativa, basically cannabis Linnaeus, we'll say, from Carl Linnaeus, is also defined as marijuana with the G, or Rosa Maria. Now, in 1904, this shifted a little bit, but the word marijuana goes back quite a ways, spelled differently. And so the word cannabis, hemp, all of these things are, to me, interchangeable. This, to me, is evidence that this is all the same plant. Whereas in the States, we hear a lot of people kind of arguing about what vocabulary to use. It's all the same to me. And this is something actually, this is a side.
I'm just
sorry. I agree with that, but my objection has always been, you're correct. I mean, and boy, I didn't know about that second definition. Thank you. That's new information. No, my problem was when, especially in this state, I agree, probably down in Mexico, this has no effect at all. But you call marijuana, and everybody thinks it's a bad drug.
Yeah.
Right.
And you
Stigmatized
call it
word.
cannabis, and it makes them think, no, wait a minute, it's a plant. I mean, it's. I just we had a discussion on another interview the other day, and it's the difference between the lawyer that we had on, who was a business lawyer, commercial type guy. And he's the guy now going out and identifying cannabis businesses around the world and in the states here in the United States. And he approaches the legislatures, the mayor, whatever the hell he's talking to, as a cannabis business attorney. And this is a change from the past, where even still going on, where the legislators are besieged by cannabis defense attorneys, which presents crime, as opposed to our friend who presents money, which is another of your favorite subjects. So that's I'm not objecting to your history. It's actually correct. I'm objecting to what that conjures up in a neophyte's mind. That's
Yes.
where I'm
Well,
So I agree with you. And now, in terms of language, I would use the word cannabis.
I'd like to make an addition to this, if you don't mind, for just a minute, Jason, because as a content creator, I prefer to have access to all the terms, because one, it's less redundant when you're having a sentence about medical cannabis and then you want to talk about the plant again. You got to say medical cannabis over and over, where you can interchange that with hemp, marijuana, and ganja. But then at the same time, there's the algorithms as well. People, when they do search terms on the internet, they don't all just do medical cannabis. There are people from all walks of life who will type in medical marijuana, or just sit down and type in marijuana as a search engine. And if I have those words on my website and in my content, those search engines will lead those people to us, where they can learn how important it is to take time for hemp. All right, Jason,
I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to call you. I don't agree with that assumption. That last one, Casper. If you go on, if the average guy, I do this all the time. If the average guy goes on Google and types in medical marijuana, it will take you somewhere. If you type in medical cannabis, it will take you to a totally different set of facts. And
That's true.
It's again, I hear you too. I understand the algorithm thing, but this whole thing is so convoluted, even Google can't keep track of it.
Well, something that I can't figure out is when Jason said that marijuana was spelled with a G.
Yeah, that's curious, isn't it? I remember when we could tell early on the stuff that was given as research about medical cannabis, the use of cannabis, if it was spelled with an H, the government put it out. That was a U.S. government deal, and of course we were all spelling it with a J. And finally, the feds, after not understanding that we could tell instantly if it was propaganda or not, finally they changed it to a J themselves.
Yeah, but didn't you not say G?
Yeah,
yes,
G.
Yeah, in the pharmacopoeia, it's MARIGUANA.
Wow.
Yeah. Oregano.
Learn something after 20 years of doing this.
That's what I just did earlier. I just learned something here. I love it.
This is why I love this pathway, because we all get to learn something constantly, it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jason,
so in regards
tell us about motorcycles.
Well, real quick, I'll just let me tie one thing together, is that I think that the vocabulary matters when we're talking about legislation and law. It matters when we're talking about medicine and medicinals. And then we have the community. And so, we do have a convoluted view of all these details, but I think it does matter when we're talking about law and science, because what I see is things are not used appropriately in the current laws and definitions that we have today. And that comes to like the 0.3% definition that we see currently in the US.
Yep.
Now, Al, you actually asked a really amazing question. I'm a lifer in terms of riding motorcycles. I started when I was a young teenager. And when I broke my back, obviously I couldn't ride it at the time. But when I was in Costa Rica doing a presentation, I ended up starting a healing process with the plant that is outside of what anybody has heard of. I'm not going to get into the details, but it involved some things that were about mixing the plant and putting it into my body in a different way, not ingestion, not topically, and not smoking. I'm going to kind of keep that out of here because I don't want to encourage people to do this process without really learning about it first. So we need research. But so after going through that process, that procedure, which was illegal, but it worked, and it took about a year for it to start to take an effect. And pretty much as soon as I started to feel in my leg again, I started riding a motorcycle down in Costa Rica. And so I toured the whole country. I would go to the beach and rip up the sand along the ocean and just enjoy myself. I mean, I'd fall once in a while, but I'm not racing down the highway at 70, 80, 100 miles an hour like I would in the States. Like when I was younger, I was kind of just cruising along, enjoying things. And that led to, in 2017, I left Colorado on a motorcycle, a KLR 650, with my dog on the back, my service dog. And she and I traveled through many of the states in the US, just kind of zigzagging all over the place. And every place we went, we would run into cannabis activists. I'd get a message from somebody and they'd say, hey, come on over, you're in my area. And so I met all these amazing people. As we all know, there's some incredible people in the cannabis world. And eventually crossed the border into Mexico thinking I'm going to ride the motorcycle around the world. And so I get into Mexico with the stereotypes that we were taught, and I was floored. I was blown away. People were so kind to me. I got fed, housed, invited to so many festivities, weddings, funerals, which is a different experience in terms of Dia de los Muertos, for example, and how they celebrate with happiness and joy and life versus our views in the States. And I was avoiding the cities. I would just kind of take these side roads. I wouldn't do the highway route. And I worked my way down to Costa Rica again, through Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras and so on and so forth, and ended up coming back up to Chiapas, to San Cristobal. And I ended up staying here. And then the pandemic started, whatever you want to call it. And I ended up staying because we didn't really experience the shutdown that a lot of people were experiencing in other countries around the world. And that's mainly because this is predominantly a Mayan community. There are many different cultures mixed in from Mayan traditions. Tzotzil, Nahual, Tetzal, Lacandona. These are different groups of Mayan people. And it reminded me of what I knew already about the Zapatista issues and how they really are here to defend their belief systems. And that tied together with plants, it tied together with community, it tied together with where I'm living here. This is actually, I'm inside of what they call an ejido. It's a community-owned village. And a lot of people in the US really misunderstand what a lot of these cultures are really about because of the propaganda that's online, for example. And so like the motorcycle was a big piece.
It sounds like you're living in a bird sanctuary.
Well, I've got chickens. I've got about 30 chickens, ducks, and turkey over in that direction.
Well, everybody down here is talking about the cost of eggs, man. I know you're not worried about it. So, but listen, the whole experience that you've gone through here. Well, I have to ask this question because if I don't, there'll be customers calling us up and people listening saying, Jason, what happened to the dog?
So Asher was her name. She was trained as my service dog and also hunting. We used to pheasant hunt together. And she passed away about 2 years ago from natural causes, I'll say.
So she made this trip
a cancer tumor.
She made this whole trip with. Well, there is. She must have loved every day of it, man. You're a good dad. Well,
What kind of what
She
kind
would
of
she would
dog do
travel
you
with me everywhere.
nice.
She would. Escher was a German short hair pointer. She was a hunting dog, bird
Mhm.
dog, if you will. And she would travel with me everywhere. She's been on all the flights that I've been in, to all the countries that I've spoken in. She traveled on the back of the bike, probably close to, I'll say, probably 30,000 kilometers. So what is that? Maybe 15,000 miles, we'll say.
She probably set a record.
And yeah, and we ended up in the newspapers here in Mexico because people would take pictures of us on the highway, and it would end up in the paper.
Did you ever have
It was
problems
a sight to see.
What about going from one country to the other? Did you have problems with that, or
No. A
Excellent.
lot of countries acknowledged the service dog paperwork that I had.
excellent? And when
Yeah.
was that going on? Years?
When
When?
for traveling, you mean?
Yeah, they're going around
Well,
this
I-
all doing this.
So I guess, I mean, I got her in, I guess it was 2009, I think it was. And so pretty much from about a year into that, I'll say day one, but a year into that, she was traveling with me everywhere. She had to go through service dog training. She went through hunting training. But from there forward, she was with me by my side pretty much every single day. There was probably a week out of her entire life that I didn't have her with me, but that was it.
Great story, Casper.
so-
we want to put that in the trailer. Jason and his dog. What was her name again?
Escher, after MC Escher, the artist.
There you go.
MC Escher is known for very like mathematical art, very like stairs that go connecting in a circle, or stairs that go up and water flows uphill and all these weird things. But yeah.
Well, I've
And
been owned
she-
by a dog
she
for a
was
long
good.
time. I know what it's like to be owned
Yeah.
by a dog.
I'm owned by one
That-
too.
And I'm
Yeah,
and
we're
I'm
all
owned by
probably
one right
born.
now, and I know Al Burns is owned by one right now too. So
Three.
And
I'm
3, he
actually-
said. Yeah.
Well, they're
and
remarkably
they rule.
quiet. Well,
They rule the house. They rule the house.
She saved my life. I mean, about 3 times, literally. And I wouldn't call her a dog. He was really a companion, true companion.
Yeah, companion, friend. Sure, those are the right words. Well, everybody that I believe that has a dog, if they understand and they treat it appropriately, understands just what we're talking about. If they don't, then they shouldn't have the dog or the horse or chickens, or whatever the hell you got. Just get a fish and starve it to death or something. But
I do have a question. Being we know that you've obviously got a lot of ducks and things and chickens in the background and behind you there. How did Escher get along with everybody on the farm there? All your birds?
So the place I live now, Escher didn't see this place. Escher passed away before I moved into this location. But to answer that, everywhere we went, because we did spend a lot of time on farms. I lived on a ranch up in Colorado with Escher, and so with the cattle, with the chickens, with all the wildlife. Also, because of her training, she would not chase them automatically. Her discipline was incredible. She was steady under the gun when we were hunting. She wouldn't go after an animal unless I gave her permission. There was actually a presentation I did up in Colorado during my teaching of what I've been through in terms of my medical issues, and I was letting her run outside, and she ended up catching a rabbit and bringing it over to me, and I have my suit on, the tie and everything, and some people are like, "Oh, your dog just killed a rabbit! Oh my gosh!" And she comes over to me and hands it to me, as she was supposed to do. Yeah. And she didn't kill it in the beginning, but it was injured enough, and so I ended up. Well, I won't get into the details because I don't want to steer the conversation in that direction. But
family show. Nature
took its course. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I feel very fortunate that she was never aggressive with anybody. She never bit anybody. Very, very kind animal. Very amazing
Yeah,
in terms of
well,
what she
hey,
taught me.
Jason,
speaking
what
of
are
riding
you
on the back
doing?
of a bike, that
What are you
says
doing
enough.
now, Jason? Do you have a website, or is there anything that you'd like to publicize or need help with? Or
Great question. So, I mean, originally when I was coming into this conversation with you guys, I kind of had the idea that we were actually going to talk about all these things. I do have some things that I would love to talk about, and maybe we can bring those up another time. But in terms of specifics with definition and specifics with how do we move this train forward, because I do see ways to move this forward. In terms of websites, I have my own personal website, which is my last name, lauve.com, lauve.com. People can find me if they just search Mr. Hemp, Jason Lauve, Lauve. And I'm working on a project with a whole bunch of people right now called deschedule.earth. And our pathway with that is really repeal and reschedule and deschedule, excuse me. I think scheduling is inappropriate. This talk about moving to Schedule 3 to me would just hand everything we've done over the years to the pharmaceutical companies. So, for example, codeine, if I remember right, is listed under Schedule 3, and if you get caught without a prescription with codeine, you're going to get fined and possibly go to jail. And so I don't think cannabis belongs in that. I don't think cannabis should be regulated in any way the way it has been forced upon us. In fact, I think a lot of that pathway is illegal and filled with fraud. And I think currently the models that we're under with the regulations and so on and so forth are actually allowing and encouraging the black market, allowing and encouraging cartels and mafias and so on and so forth to continue in what we're seeing. It's I think contributing to the illegal products that we see in the markets. I think if we look at the
disagree,
sorry,
we go Schedule 3. That's the death of dispensaries.
Yeah,
They just go away.
Yeah,
they just go away. So
well,
those kind of decisions.
It's a big decision, and this isn't an opportunity that comes along every year or anything like this. It's been like 50 or 60 years since the last time there was any discussion of this, and this is an opportunity with so many people in the U.S. Supporting medical cannabis as well as supporting the recreational cannabis. It's well more than, it's huge numbers. They've got to get something done, and it just sort of reminds me of Mexico because of the fact that there's something that needs to be done, and everybody knows it, but there's always something that holds it up. Always.
Now the UN has descheduled cannabis. So
they moved it from Schedule 4 to Schedule 1.
Well, it's
that's backwards in the U.S. But it
doesn't mean the same. It basically means it's not regulated so much internationally.
Right.
People can trade it. It's not criminalized anymore. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So in effect, what you're saying is, look, what a lot of us are saying. Look, the world is essentially agreeing that this is a good product, and we'd like more of it. And the United States sits there like a dumbass and says, well, the only thing that we can hold out hope for is that the remaining 10 states that are still acting as cannabis dinosaurs come around to the other 40 and all the territories and DC and say, this has value. And whether or not the feds actually go to the process of descheduling, I've told this story before. I'm not sure you know, Jason, but when the UN descheduled, there's a U.S. law that commands the Attorney General of the United States to deschedule cannabis as well. And we've gone through this process. I had with two other guys, we informed this of the White House a couple of years ago, and with the drug guy for the White House, and he was astonished. He had no clue that this law, but he took notes. And the three of us actually heard President Biden about 2 weeks after the interview with the drug fella say on national TV that he was telling the Attorney General to look into this. So they did pay attention to us. So we waited about 6-8 months, the three of us, all vets, and we wrote a letter to the Attorney General and said, so what's going on, man? Huh? The man told you, the law says, and we never heard back, of course. So essentially, you're on the right track. Deschedule is the only acceptable alternative.
Yes.
Everything else is just
Yes.
focus. It's putting everything in limbo again. It's a delaying tactic, and it hurts everybody involved.
Yeah.
And that's something that, originally that's what I wanted to address because, for example, one of the big problems that I see is we talk about this 0.3% THC definition. One, I think that is an inappropriate way to actually define a plant. We don't go around saying, oranges are defined by how much vitamin C they have. But even the 0.3% number is unscientific. It has no connection to anything. It's arbitrary. And in fact, Dr. Ernest Small from Canada actually states this in his work. He's the guy who actually mentioned that 0.3% number in his own work. And it wasn't meant to differentiate between medical or recreational cannabis. It was meant to differentiate parts of the plant. So it's being used in a way that it really doesn't mean anything. It's nonsense. It's non-science. And from my perspective of things, that is really important because we really shouldn't be going around with this arbitrary data points. And if we, for example, just to put that into perspective, if you look at all of the cultivars of hemp or medicinal plants around the world, they're usually categorized by how much THC and CBD, so the ratio. And so I'm okay with differentiating two sides of the puzzle, if you will, medicinal and fiber type, I'll call it. But currently that 0.3% is limiting us into a category I believe is meant to feed the industrial giant, for big money to come in and control things, for companies to come up with certified seeds that are approved by a government. We shouldn't be asking permission or listening to an authority. We are supposed to be our government. That's our responsibility. We're supposed to participate, not wait for somebody to hand out a dictate to us. And so participation, I think, is critical. And so that's why I'm really happy that, Casper, that you have this show, because it really is allowing this conversation to continue. And this has been my fear, is that a lot of this kind of dialogue it doesn't exist out there very much.
Well, there's one other aspect of it as well, besides the pharmaceutical. And as you mentioned, it's the seed. And I know for a fact that here in Indiana, if a farmer grows a particular crop of corn, and that has some kind of association with a DNA molecular structure of another corn that's owned by a patent by Monsanto, then Monsanto, as an example, owns that copyright on that corn, and suddenly your 40 or 50 acres is owned by a court that's taken you to a court system that's owned by a big corporation, because they've somehow managed to, copyright the DNA of a frickin' seed. And so
that's a big concern to me.
Yes. As well.
That actually plays into where I live, because the corn down here is indigenous corn, and they're trying to keep the GMO corn from coming in from the United States. But because of some treaties that we have between Mexico and the US, that is a very, very big barrier in front of a lot of people. So it's happening with all sorts of seeds. It's not just cannabis and corn. But I'm very familiar with that issue, because it affects us right here, actually. I have a friend of mine who's part of that dialogue. She participates in the maíz conversation, maíz being the word for corn in Spanish. And these are big issues. These are major, major things that really should be addressed right now in regards to what you're bringing up. And this is not something that's talked about. Like currently, we actually see a GMO manipulated hemp variety that exists in the United States. I'm not okay with that, because we don't even know what nature has to offer. And I'll give you a little case example of that, which I think is very telling. In Nevada, there's actually a research paper project that took place where they purchased 2,600 and some odd varieties from the different dispensaries. And out of those 2,600, there are only 3 genetic cultivars. Okay, so that, number one, is not a profile of nature. Number two, it shows how controlled what we think is diverse it's not really diverse. And so we're way more controlled than we realized in this cannabis pathway that a lot of us have been in for 20 years or more. And that's of great concern to me. And I think if Jack Kerr was alive today, I mean, I remember him screaming at the last talk he did about not paying the U.S. government 1 penny of tax. We really should be following in his pathway. That man was a genius, is a genius in terms of his legacy. And I think his legacy is being distorted because the people carrying it forward have their own agenda, the monetary agenda, I'll call it. I don't mean to offend anybody, but that's my view of what we see. Yeah. And so I think this conversation is really important to me in that respect. I don't want to, I have nothing to gain from this. All I can do is leave a legacy at this point and share my story.
None of the guys here ever got in this for the money, and none of us ever made it. It cost us all a lot of money.
No,
and I know
countries,
a lot of people.
Countries, that's usually the countries are usually saying, oh, "Look at the money we can make off of it." Right?
Yeah, and then there's a lot of guys
every place.
It's just capitalism. I got no problem with capitalism, and there's good capitalists and bad capitalists. And those of us that sat it out, we had no idea what the hell the end was. We were just trying to bring freedom to whatever the hell that meant. And so here we are. And I still think that we're in the sorted out process.
Yes.
We're certainly not done with getting freedom. I want to grow my own. I want 2 things. I want to grow my own pot in my own backyard and it'll be left alone. And where I live in Franklin County, Florida, I'm allowed to do that because the sheriff understands I'm a mature man and I ought to be able to do what I want with my body. The other thing is, though, as a potential patient, I'm a patient, but I might get worse. I want to be able to go somewhere and buy a laboratory tested, organically grown, wonderful cannabis plant material from somebody that can tell me that that's what that product is at a reasonable price. And I think we all want that. We're not looking for anything else. But the only way I see this to go forward, and I'll say this until I get agreement from the government, instead of criminalizing the plant, which we're all saying is stupid, and it is. Everybody thinks it's stupid. Even the politicians think it's stupid. President Trump has said it's stupid. What are we doing? And the Pope has said, if it works for people, give it to them. I mean, these are smart guys, you know. But when all of that is said and done, we're still going to want a regulated market, and it's going to be something that's going to have to be done over time. We're not done yet, but just like you are saying, Jason, we can tell your conversation here isn't anything you've decided that this is all history. You're living it right now, and that's what we've all got to do. I do appreciate this conversation. It's been. Every time we get somebody like you on board, I go, wow, man, I'm glad these guys are out there. And I just want to tell you, I'm glad you're out there. That's very, very,
likewise.
Very, very good work.
Yeah.
Likewise. And there's a lot more to say about that. You asked about the cartels. I could go into that pathway. I really didn't touch on that. To me, I'm kind of, I'm going to leave that alone for now, maybe another time, just because of what's happening right now, literally. And I'm not here to poke anybody. I don't want to upset anybody. I kind of want to keep everybody in the same tune. But because of the dynamics, people are kind of sensitive to some of these conversations. And
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the big things I do see, though, is I look at things like judicial dissolution. I see laws that we already have in place that could actually address a lot of these things. That's another conversation. But in regards to,
we gotta move on. Where we've done, but we don't want to get too boring here. But it's not been boring, but it can get tedious for the younger generation to pay attention for anything over.
You actually that's actually a big issue that I'm very aware of. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we will have you back. You have more to say. You say it well. We're glad to have you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Al.
Yeah.
Thank both Al's. Thanks, Casper. I really appreciate this.
And I do want to remind the audience that we are back. We're back every week, and we're telling the whole world how important it is. This plant is legal for medicinal use and for industrial use and for all the uses that this plant can provide. And the only way we're going to be found is if you share us with your friends. Please make it a point to do that. Jason, it has been a lot of fun having you on the show, Mr. Hemp. It rocks to have Mr. Hemp on the Time for Hemp Broadcasting Network. And I also want to say thank you to Al Graham. Al, why don't you tell us about what you're doing up there with the Pace Radio Broadcasting Network?
First, I want to mention thanks, Jason, for coming onto the show here and telling us your story. It's always great to be involved in hearing these stories of how somebody, just as a patient, regular person, was able to get to a point of sitting in an office of a lawmaker and creating a law in 40 minutes and having others follow along. So that's fantastic. As far as the Pace Radio Network, you can find us at paceradio.net, and we broadcast something new every day of the week. So check us out.
And Al Byrne, I know you've written a little bit about that cannabis, marijuana, hemp movement. Oh, did I say marijuana? Oh, no, don't. It means the medical cannabis movement. Oh, we want to let people know about your book and how they can find it.
Yeah, actually, I produced and starred in and was the narrator of a 1997 video, a 20-minute video that the Sundance Film Festival created a special award for. We had entered a category, medical treatment of patients with cannabis, and they didn't know what to do. So they just created a new award, and it was called Marijuana as Medicine. So there was a time in my life where I was involved in that word. I don't want to say that it's not a bad word. It's okay. The book is For Country and Cannabis. So that's because I'm talking cannabis now. It's a story of my 24 years in the military, and in those years, the interface with the cannabis plant, both personally and my troops and the guys that I served with and other folks. And then getting out of the military and spending the last, whatever the hell it's been, 40 years making medical cannabis a reality. This just didn't happen, folks. Back when in the 80s and stuff, that nobody was even saying the words. There were no words spoken. There was nothing written, nothing. And somebody had to do it. And I was lucky enough to gather together some true heroes, patients, just like Jason, and professionals, doctors, nurses, PhDs, researchers, to back these people up. And they spoke up at great risk, personal and professional, and pulled it off. Here we are today. And so the cannabis part is a history where I identify these heroes, heroines, the bad guys, the government, the bullshit, the obstruction of free speech that the government has pulled off on me and my cohorts for up to tomorrow, I suppose. It's a good book. Read it.
And as Al mentioned at the top of the hour, we do have a great archive here at timeforhemp.news that we would encourage you to stop and visit and wade through, because you'll find the entire cannabis hemp movement history in those archives. It's interesting as we go through them now. We see how the movement has grown, and we also have had different guests come back on a reoccurring basis to learn how they've handled different court cases or how they've handled different engineering ideas when it comes to inventing new machinery to make this wonderful plant more valuable and more easy to access on the market. So please visit our archives. And then also you can find us now on iHeartRadio. You can also find us on iTunes and Spotify, and that makes it easy for you to listen to our content and share us with your friends. Hit the subscribe button and let the whole world know how important it is to take time for hemp.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look and spend some time for him. Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yes, it's time for him. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 bales of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rest. Well, time for help! Yeah!
Time for Hemp is a Pace Radio Network content provider.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
When you have a pain that's reached its peak, Legacy for 20, it's so unique. If organic cannabis is what you seek, here's your trusted partner 7 days a week. Suppository salves, vapes and drops, topicals, edibles, infused pop. Just when life seems like it ain't easy, at Legacy 420, enjoy a pop freezy. Lab tested products, make them the GOAT. Legacy 420 out on your road. Legacy 420 in Tyndonega Mohawk territory. Indigenous organic cannabis at its finest.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.